This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
Power
Business with Kaya Sitole, Monday to Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. and Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Welcome back to the Tuesday evening edition of Power Business. We are, of course, together until 8 p.m. on what's been a truly extraordinary couple of days in the political circles. Tshwane, Eguruleni, Egoli still have a lot of people talking because we cannot believe what we've seen in the past couple of days. Nevertheless, the world must move on, even if the winds of change are here. Talking about the world of business, we are now joined on the line by the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Directors, Phami Natesan. Phami, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kaya.
I hope you have electricity wherever you are, but moving on from that, this idea of governance is something that is obviously of keen interest to the IOD in particular, and I think in the South African context, we're always trying to sort of survey the landscape, and one of the key issues is, of course, the experience and the wisdom that any board of directors has to have at any point in time. Talk us through the merits and the benefits of having a board with wisdom. I don't want to say a board with experience, a board with wisdom.
Look, I think boards play absolutely critical roles in corporations in South Africa. And we've certainly seen examples of where this has gone wrong with catastrophic effects for, stakeholders, for various stakeholders, employees, shareholders, society at large. And that's why it's so important that we have the right people serving on boards. And that's why director competencies are so important. With any other profession, there are competencies that you have to have and certain skills, experience, qualifications, etc., that you have to have before you can serve. But with directorship, unfortunately, in our legal system, there are no prerequisite requirements or competencies at this stage that are required before someone can be appointed to serve as a director.
Now, I suppose the risk associated with that, Phami, is that if I started my own business many years ago, I'm going to be a director in this company. And of course, the basis for me starting the business was not because I was a lawyer or an advocate. It was because I had that entrepreneurial skill. So there's no way you can stop me from being a director then. However, given the enormous responsibility associated with being a director, is it then possible for me to be skilled in some of the key competencies that directors have to have regardless of their original entrepreneurial persuasion?
Yes, definitely. And look, corporate governance applies to any sort of size and nature of organization and can be scaled up or down depending on where you are as an organization. I think what's critical is even for startups or entrepreneurs or people starting up their own businesses is to understand their role as a director, because they still have a legal role and responsibility in terms of not only the Companies Act but also the common law. So it's important that you understand the basics of what you need to know to serve and how to fulfill your duties as a director. And then, of course, as the organization grows or as you get exposure to serve on other boards with maybe larger public interests, in the listed company space or in public sector entities or even in your larger private organizations, it becomes even more critical that you start formalizing your director training and professionalization.
Now, Phami, all of this probably wouldn't be as much risk if we found a way to actually embed it into practice. We know corporate governance practices have evolved over time, in that the King Code, for example, then says this is the best practice. And through its persuasive powers, the JSE is also able to say, wait, hold on, comply with that guidance, comply with that directive. Is this the one missing dimension that we haven't found a way of embedding with more explicit intentions into corporate practices?
Possibly, to some extent they have been, King report and the recommendations has been embedded into our common law, in that when the courts are looking at directors' conduct and they're trying to determine what was reasonable conduct for a director, they often look to King 4 as that benchmark for reasonable conduct of what the director should have or should not have done in that instance.
And of course, with that in mind, should we then also perhaps insist on some of the key competency and some of the key competency skills actually being a matter of a board of directors has to explain that the sum of us or the collective has the skills, and that's how we believe we're in the best interest of this company?
Absolutely, and professionalization of directorship is one thing that we've been pushing for a very long time. Similar to other professions, if you were building a house, you'd want to ensure that the architect or the engineer was registered as such and had the necessary qualifications, etc. Similarly, when you're appointing board members, especially to the large public interest organizations, ideally they should be members of the professional body that sets the standard for director conduct, that has a code of conduct that members need to comply with, and that issues thought leadership and keeps its members up to date with developments in the area of corporate governance.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about the importance of public interest entities, these are the entities when if something goes wrong, there are so many more losers out in the ecosystem, whether it's the employees or the shareholders themselves or society at large. So I imagine that as soon as a public interest score of a particular level is reached, the pressure to actually get things right is even more amplified. Are we seeing those types of companies that are probably either growing over time, understanding the importance of getting their governance right?
I think, it's a difficult question because, yes, I do think many of them take governance very seriously. Interestingly enough, if you look at our corporate clients, the majority of our corporate clients are sitting in the public sector, not necessarily the listed space. And then if you look at professionalization, I wouldn't yet say that our big public interest organizations in the listed space and public sector space have bought into the idea of getting their director certified yet. And I think there's still room for improvement there.
Yeah. The other dimension that we obviously have to deal with is that when people talk about experience and that wisdom, it then turns out as a consequence of how we've done things in the past, there's probably a small list of people, maybe no more than 100, that you can then say these are the ones with the requisite experience. Does that then limit the pool from which we can tap into?
Potentially, but we also have one designation. So we have Chartered Director, which is the mastery designation. And then we also have Certified Director, which attests knowledge of corporate governance. And that designation is supposed to signal to the market that the individual has the knowledge of governance to be able to serve. And hopefully that then gives them an opportunity. The other thing I also advise when I often get asked by members is start serving somewhere, even if it's your local library, your body corporate, your school governing body, a non-profit that you're particularly interested in. Start serving somewhere so that that experience can't be an excuse when there's an opportunity for a proper board position.
Yeah, I think just that awareness of what happens on the granular levels of a board structure is, of course, a matter of critical importance. We've seen, unfortunately, in our recent past that particularly when it comes to large state-owned enterprises, the basis for people being in the room and saying we're boards of directors is probably not always guided by governance considerations. Is there something that we as society can start maybe advocating for and lobbying for to make sure that even those organizations are indeed properly and professionally capacitated?
Yes, certainly. And we've written about it in various avenues in the past, including a letter to the Zondo Commission most recently. Absolutely, we need to be standing up. One of the things in the public sector is that there isn't really an independent nominations process when it comes to appointments into these positions. It's really up to the sole shareholder, which is government. And oftentimes you'll find there are political reasons for appointments rather than looking at the best people for the job in some of these instances. And yes, as you say, public needs to start making a louder noise about these things and holding our leaders to account for these appointments.
I would imagine that an organization like yours is very persuasive in sort of getting the government in particular to sort of have an understanding of that. Do we see maybe the idea of the state embracing some of these recommendations? Because at the end of the day, when these institutions fail, it's a tragedy for all of us, but also a bad reflection on the people that actually created those governance structures.
Well, we certainly hope so. And I mean, as I've said, we've written comment letters to the Zondo Commission as they finalize their report. We've also most recently written a comment letter on the company's amendment bill, where we've included and highlighted the importance of directors and having criteria for directors to be appointed there. So hopefully some of it comes to fruition.
Yeah, and of course, I think when you look at the amendments that are proposed in the Companies Act bill, it's obviously quite important for us to ensure that it does indeed create a template that is fit for purpose in relation to the governance framework. And I suspect that if we still don't have that very explicit instruction to boards and to companies that you need to professionalize, we are running the risk. The long run will actually still really be living at the risk that some people will collectively just not be fit for purpose to run a particular organization.
Absolutely, and fit for purpose is such an important phrase that you use there. We need people running our corporations in both the public and private sector who have the technical and functional competencies to serve, and also who have the personal and social competencies and the moral compass to serve in the interest of an organization and not in the interest of themselves. And that's so important.
And I suppose in light of what we've seen, some of the proposals saying there should be union representation on boards, for example, at the end of the day, we're still going to have a consortium of individuals with different skills, some with different experiences, which for me means that director competency training in one form or another remains remarkably important and crucial, particularly when you see just how rapidly the world of business and the world of trade and the world of global trade is evolving.
Absolutely. Things get more complicated on an exponential level every year. And directors don't have a choice but to keep up with what's happening, or they will not be fit for purpose and not be able to fulfill their functions. With regards to employee representation on boards, I think we must just remember that a board of directors has to always act in the best interest of an organization, but taking the needs, wants, and expectations of all stakeholders into account. And one of the key stakeholders are employees, but there are many other key stakeholders as well who need to be taken into account when a board is making decisions.
Yeah, it's very critical for us to sort of get that balance right. As the IOD, you obviously have some training and some advocacy programs. Are you seeing a greater uptake of those particular offerings, particularly when boards are being formulated or being restructured?
Yes, absolutely. We've seen quite a nice uptake in training and also certification, specifically with our certified director designation, which is very encouraging because it means more and more people are embracing this concept of good governance and professionalization of directorship. I think the next step is to see those people who are showing the right signs to uplifting and skilling themselves, then being the ones being appointed. Because oftentimes you'll find the people in the big positions are not necessarily the ones, coming to us for these things.
Yeah. At the end of the day, Pamela, I suppose that in spite of everything that we input as a competency dimensions and all these learnings, it still comes down to the individuals and the ethical framework, because I imagine there's no board that was more accomplished than the Steinhoff board in particular at some point in time, and that didn't insulate it from the implosion that happened there.
Absolutely. So, so important that it's not just about, in governance, we talk about ethical and effective leadership. It's not just about being effective and knowing what you need to do and doing it well, but it's also about having the proper moral compass when you're doing those things.
And that's a very key issue. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. The other big thing, since you mentioned Steinhoff, is, the other mistake we sometimes make is when we end up with groupthink because we appoint too many similar people onto a board of directors. And that's why in King 4, we advocate for a diverse board, not only diverse in terms of race or gender or age, but also diverse in terms of skills, experience, background, etc., so that we can challenge each other and come from different perspectives and eventually, have great decisions made on that board.
And I think that dimension of diversity, Palm, is probably one of those that some companies will say, well, actually, we just decided, we just applied our minds and we said, well, this one doesn't come from the same background, doesn't come from the same industry, so therefore that's what diversity is all about. But I imagine it's a bit more intricate than that, and it's probably a question of, well, collectively, when you are comparing what this board does and what the society expects, there should be that blend of different ideas and different persuasions rather than a matter of, well, you said we must be diverse, he looks different to me, so therefore we are diverse.
Absolutely. It's much more nuanced than just looking at people. You have to take their backgrounds, lifestyles, experiences, not only in business but also in life, into account when you're creating this diverse board.
When people want to get more insights into what the IOD is doing in this space, where can they get hold of you or the organization?
Sure, they can visit our website, www.iodsa.co.za, and we've got lots of information there. And then on all your major social media platforms, where they can find us there.
Paminata San, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Directors of South Africa, thank you very much for your time, giving us insights into the importance of making sure that you've got the rightly capacitated and professionally capacitated members within a board structure, because the importance of governance in South Africa cannot be overemphasized in light of the scandals we've seen in recent times. It is 6:47 p.m. Time for the latest power traffic.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.